Hey, New Life, I'm Rachel, and today I have the opportunity of bringing you today's devotion. If you're going to be taking notes or have a journal, today's Devo is entitled The Desert Road. We're going to be looking at one verse in particular that comes out of Acts chapter 8, verse 26. This verse happens to be about Philip, a man who was on a journey. Now, this isn't Philip, the son of Herod the Great, or Philip of Macedonia, who was the father of Alexander the Great, or even Philip, who was the apostle and companion of Jesus. But instead, this was a Philip who was first mentioned after 7 other servants, and that was still recorded as just also being Philip. But I find this Philip to be really significant and fascinating because he was just an ordinary man, but he embarked on an incredible and extraordinary adventure. Today's text reads like this. Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Go south on the road, the desert road, and go to Jerusalem to Gaza." You're probably wondering what this little verse has to do with anything, but I'll tell you what stood out to me. The fact that they made mention to a desert road. Why did they have to be that specific? What is it about that road? Put that little note on pause because I also want to focus on one other detail. Philip was a pilgrim, and the entire Bible is a record of pilgrimage. These nomadic routes can be seen in the psalmist's writing, where it says, "Blessed are those whose strength is in you, whose heart is set on pilgrimage." Journeys are a story of faith. Abraham's life attests to this when it says, by faith, when Abraham was called to go to a place, he went. In addition, faith itself is a compilation of journeys. An encounter with the way, Jesus, often happens when we are on our way. For example, Paul the Apostle encountered Jesus when he was on his way to Damascus. I mention all of these stories because they all involve spending time in the desert. Israel crossed the Sinai desert. Abraham lived on the edge of the Negev desert. Paul spent time in the Arabian desert before he started his ministry. So perhaps Philip's journey down the desert road is not just a random incident, but in fact, it could be a pattern for us to follow. The journey of our lives will inevitably involve a time of testing. We know and understand that testing can be good for us and good for society. Think about this. You would never get on an airplane if the pilot had not been through his proper training and testing. You also would never drive a car that had never been tested. So why is it then that we are surprised when we have tests in our own lives? I think we can all understand the concept of testing applying to an ancient hero's journey, but we tend to resist it when it comes to our own stories and lives. Yet it is through these trials that we develop fruit. We can't escape these tests or seasons of disappointment, but we can look to the Bible. There are examples all throughout the test of wilderness seasons. In the Bible, these tests are often in the wilderness or, in Philip's case, on a desert road. For example, let's look at Israel's exodus out of Egypt to leave and enter the promised land. That was their goal, but following that, the Bible describes this. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the desert these 40 years, to humble you and to test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his command. This, too, is the very passage that Jesus quoted when he was tested in the desert. If Israel and Jesus himself were tested in the desert, you can guarantee that you too will be tested. We have examples throughout the Bible that demonstrate the importance of wilderness seasons, and you can look these up in your own time. For example, the stories of David, Elisha, Philip, and Paul. If these examples don't inspire you to face your disappointments and tests with a confidence, maybe they can heed as a warning, because there are other stories, for instance, such as Samson, Saul, and Solomon, who were never tested in the wilderness, or they didn't take the desert road, and they all paid the price for doing so. So all of you are probably wondering, why did these biblical tests take place in the wilderness? What is it about the desert? And why couldn't it have been the mountains or the seas, couldn't that have also been suitable places? Well, I really believe that it is because the desert is filled with paradoxes. They are both vast and intimate, harsh and comforting. They invoke loneliness, but also encourage companionship. The desert is the crucible for change. God's allurement of Israel into the desert was temporary. The desert was never Israel's final destination. God wanted them to possess the promise he had for them, and he wanted them to live in the land and prosper. But the blessings that they were to enjoy came alongside the intimacy with God, and that intimacy could not have developed without a temporary visit in the desert. It is no surprise today that our world tends to want easy access to blessing without having the harsh lessons of wilderness. So I wanted to share a little more on what the desert road can offer you. First, the desert road inspires worship. I have to think that it's no wonder that the idea of one God was birthed in the desert. Idolatry tends to flourish when there is distraction. Water and its creations, mountains and their beauty provoke a natural focus for our adoration. But in the bareness of the wilderness, there's only God. Perhaps that's the reason God led Israel through the desert on their way to the promised land. It played a significant role in the overall plan. Exodus chapter 7 verse 16 puts it this way: "Let my people go so that they may worship me in the wilderness." And why did the Spirit of God lead Jesus into the wilderness before his public ministry? Why did the angel of the Lord go to Philip to take him on the desert road? Because the desert inspires worship. Number 2, the desert removes distractions. God led Israel into the desert for 2 reasons. He wanted to reignite their passion and love for him and remove the idols from their lives. For Israel, the desert became both a place of intimacy and surgery. It was a clean and sacred place. It will challenge you to discard the unimportant and re-examine the urgent. Desert removes distraction. And finally, number 3, desert reveals identity. Israel's season in the wilderness was a sanctuary of time. In our increasingly busy world and when our pace of life is unyielding, we need a similar sanctuary. Deserts provide a place of timelessness. The city lights are dimmed and the lights of heaven are amplified. It is a place where truth is somehow revealed and challenged. After 40 years in the wilderness, Moses had an encounter with God and the burning bush. And in that moment, both things were revealed: God's name and a revelation of identity. This prepared Moses to take on the task ahead, the liberation of a nation. The time in the wilderness exposes our inner worlds. So deserts reveal identity. As we have seen, deserts can serve as a powerful educator. Their enormity teaches us humility, their bareness teaches us dependency, and their stillness teaches us intimacy. So my prayer for you today is that you wouldn't be discouraged on the desert road in your life, but encouraged in your wilderness. Jesus will lead you to greater intimacy, and your blessing is just on the other side of your journey. Have a great rest of your day.